Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daisy. Today I will be reading my subscribers' spooky stories. So if you're interested, grab your snacks, grab your cobija, and let's get straight into it. Hi Daisy. When I separated from my ex-husband, I moved to Washington State from Massachusetts to be closer to my family. I stayed with my parents for a few months until I was able to get an affordable place of my own. In February 2016, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. I became friends with another parent who lived in the neighborhood across from me. He was a nice guy who had moved to Washington with his family from Arizona. Our kids were similar in age and they attended the same school. I had only been in the apartment for a few weeks when my neighbor approached me one day while I was getting groceries out of my car. He said, "Hey, if you ever have any issues with the neighbor who lives above you, just know you're not the problem. Other people in this neighborhood have had issues with her, and management has moved her around at least 3 times. I've never had any problems with neighbors in the past, so I was hoping that I wouldn't have any issues with her." Nonetheless, I took heed to his words of caution. Well, problems started when my children were laughing and playing in the living room while watching television. My neighbor abruptly came downstairs and proceeded to bang on my door. My mom, who was visiting at the time, answered the door and she apologized to my neighbor. She looked really upset, but she accepted the apology and left. I got the feeling that my neighbor did not like me very much. There were a few occasions where I would catch her peering at me through the blinds of her window. I also began to experience unusual things happening in my home. For instance, when I was cleaning my kitchen, a cup was tossed across the kitchen counter. Another time, when I was home alone, the lid from my trash can was aggressively knocked off. One day, while I was sitting in my car getting ready to leave, my neighbor drove up and parked a few spaces away from me. I watched as she got out of her car with a friend whom I recognized as the assistant manager. She aggressively walked over to my apartment and threw some type of substance on my doormat. After that, I began to experience even more frightening phenomenons in my home, not just the casual objects moving here and there. One night, I was sleeping in bed and I began to experience sleep paralysis. My eyes were halfway open and I felt the pillow next to me move and hover over my face. I could actually see the pillow as it came down onto my face, as if an invisible force was attempting to smother me with it. I was having difficulty breathing, so in my mind, I said, "Jesus, help me." After a few seconds, the pillow lifted up and moved back to my left side, where it was before. I immediately woke up and began to gasp for air. I began to suspect that my neighbor was some sort of witch. Well, several weeks went by and I received a notice on my door for eviction. I had 30 days to move out of my apartment. I took the notice to the manager's office and asked why I was being evicted. My manager said, "There are several complaints on you for noise." To my dismay, it was over petty things like the shower running, the washer and dryer being too loud, children playing, stuff like that. My upstairs neighbor made these complaints against me to get me kicked out of my home. She would record herself stomping and would send the videos to the manager, blaming me for the noise. I tried my best to ignore her, but the problems continued, so I continued to make complaints on her for purposely stomping around and slamming doors. The situation eventually became more frightening. To give a few details, my bedroom had a door that led to a small covered patio outside. The key for the front door could also be used to unlock the back door. I also like to sleep with the lamp dimly lit. Well, one night I was laying in bed, sound asleep, but my spirit felt uneasy. The best way I can describe this experience is like my body was asleep, but my spirit was alert and awake. As I was laying in bed, I could observe my neighbor outside by my bedroom door. She then opened the door and poked her head inside my bedroom. The upper half of her body leaned in and she faced my direction. I knew I wasn't physically awake, but somehow I could see her watching me. She glared at me for a few seconds with a sinister look on her face, completely unaware that I could see her. Then she leaned back outside and closed the door. That incident was very scary for me because you're vulnerable when you are asleep. I'm not sure if this was a vivid nightmare or if this had actually taken place in real life. There's a possibility that she did have a spare key to my apartment because she was really good friends with the managers of the apartment complex, which is why they would always take her side whenever she had complaints about tenants. Well, after that experience, I didn't feel safe living there. I told my mom that my neighbor was giving me a hard time, and I asked her if she could pray for me to find another place to live. My mom said, "No, Deborah, how about you pray and ask God to move her away from you instead?" I thought to myself, and I was like, you know what, Mom? You're right. I have to fight with spiritual warfare, so I started fervently praying every night. I would ask God to send my neighbor away from me so she could leave me alone. I wasn't sure if my prayers would get answered because she had been living there for many years. The holidays were around the corner and things seemed to subside for a little bit, or so I thought. Shortly after the new year of 2017, I received a knock on my door. It was the police. He said, "Hey, are you banging on the ceiling?" I told the officer that I wasn't. He replied, "I want to let you know your neighbor has been calling our department non-stop about you. We're getting sick and tired of her calling us because this is not a criminal matter. It is a management issue." He goes on to say that he's going to tell her to stop calling them for non-criminal complaints. He left to talk to her and he came back after a few minutes. He told me that he told her to stop calling them and to contact management. I also informed the manager the next day. Side note, apparently he was the one who told her to call the police on me. Anyways, well, that was the last time she called the police on me. And a week after that, I saw a moving truck across the street. She packed all of her belongings and had it loaded onto the truck before the month was over. She moved all the way to the state of Florida. God protected me from her attacks and he answered my prayers. To anyone who is curious about witchcraft, my advice is not to meddle with it. I believe it's very dangerous and it can also backfire if you mess with a child of God. Thanks for sharing. From Deborah. So this is a long story. My mother did an exorcism to her best friend. This happened in Santa Ana, California, around 2002-2003. My mom used to manage an apartment complex where we used to live as well. We lived on the bottom floor and my mother's family friend on the second floor. My mother's friend has a gift, a powerful gift, that she didn't know how to control back in the day. It was around 11 p.m. at night when my mother, my siblings, and I were inside our house, when out of nowhere, the daughter of my mom's friend came running from her apartment screaming, "Tía, tía, mi mamá no está bien. My mom is not well." My mother ran to her apartment and I followed. I stood on the stairs while she entered. My mother said, "¿A dónde vas, Lupe? Where are you going?" "Lupe, ahorita vengo. Tengo que salir por un rato. I'll come back right now. I have to leave for a bit." Lupe's husband yelled out to my mother, "No la dejes ir, no es ella. Don't let her leave, that's not her." The husband was on the floor in the living room. Her husband is a muscular guy and tall, around 5'9". Lupe is about 4'9". He grabbed her so the daughter could leave and find my mother. Lupe had pushed him all the way to the living room. Lupe began screaming to let her out since she needed to leave the apartment. Pedro, her husband, told my mother, "No es ella, no sé qué tiene. That's not her. I don't know what's wrong with her." My mother started asking her questions, but Lupe's voice started changing like a man, and then to another female voice, and it wasn't her voice that we were all hearing. My mother started praying, and Lupe began speaking in another language. We couldn't understand what she was screaming at my mother though. At this point, my father had arrived and asked what was going on. My mother told him to bring our candles and rosaries from our baptisms. He returned and left everything on the doorstep. My mom had also told him to go to a family friend that lived in the apartments to bring their agua bendita, their holy water. My mom had ordered him not to enter when he returned, just to leave everything on the doorstep since she didn't know what her friend had and didn't want her to attack him. Everyone from the complex was outside hearing everything and also praying. We could hear her screaming in pain when my mother would throw the holy water all over the apartment and on her kids. We started hearing, "Please don't let them take me, don't let them get close." My mother kept praying and throwing holy water on her and making her drink it. You could hear all the way outside when she started to throw up and continued to speak what sounded like a different language. My mother demanded for whatever this was to leave this world, to leave her in peace. And out of nowhere, the apartment radiated a bright light. Everyone that was outside saw as if someone had turned on bright lights inside the house. My mother was able to describe it as a bright light that seemed like a presence was there and it suddenly had disappeared. A few hours later, my mother came out of the apartment telling everyone that everything was now fine, just to continue to pray for Lupe. Well, a couple of weeks later, Lupe came out of her apartment. We could see that she had burns from the holy water my mom threw on her. It looked as if someone burned her with cigarettes. Later, my mother explained to us that Lupe, before the possession, had not been feeling well, that she had been seeing a lady and a man following her everywhere. But Lupe didn't know what it was or why it was happening. They wanted her for the gift she had, which is a very powerful gift. She's a portal for spirits, so they can transition to the other side when one passes. I have a lot of stories to write to you. I manage a property and I have tons of stories. Hello Daisy, here's my mom's true bone-chilling story. A huge part of this story took place last year, so the memories are fresh in my mind. It was a cold, windy night in the middle of December 2022. The sky was mellow and the whole premises of our apartment was silent, except something filled my mom's ears. She sat up with a heart beating of terror. She woke up my dad and explained to him how she was hearing something, which sounded like a conversation between a group of women. She could hear them clearly, but it was hard to make out their words. It wasn't a human conversation. She knew that right off the bat. It was coming from the window, according to her, but my dad was your typical man in a horror movie. My dad brushed it off and told my mom to go to sleep. It wasn't like he was a non-believer though. He just thought my mom was hearing some loud conversation happening on another floor of the building. But then my mom heard the same thing for many days in a row. My dad had the same dismissive reply each time. One night it happened again. My mom heard the voices, but this time it was different. She woke up my dad and shushed him. He tried to locate the voices with a mind full of focus, and he found it. My dad could hear the conversation between a group of women too. One moment it was coming from the ceiling, then the next moment the noise was coming from the window. He noticed that the voices traveled. Something enraged him, and he left our apartment to go around the whole building, trying to find these women. He still believed they were regular people, but he was unsuccessful at his attempt to find them. The whole building was asleep, and it was 2:30 in the morning. Well, that was my dad's last straw. He immediately booked an appointment with a medium the next day. Before we get to my dad's meeting with the medium, let me give you the backstory. In the 1920s, there was a man who will name him JJ. He had married another woman despite already having a wife. For many, many years, his second marriage remained unknown and well hidden in the community. Also, note that JJ had 2 kids with his first wife, a daughter who we'll call B, and a son who we'll call C. Things took a turn for the worst when JJ died. the people in the town found out about his second wife. This incident took place in a third world country in the 1920s, so what JJ and his second wife did was considered taboo and evil. The community isolated themselves from the second wife, and one day, C killed her, which again was JJ's son from his first wife. C had locked the second wife in her own room and lit her on fire. She died a painful, horrible death. Her screams went unnoticed on purpose by the town citizens. Years passed and both B and C got married. The spirit of the second wife haunted C, and she wanted revenge. This worried C's wife, and since she partook in witchcraft, she made a plan to get that woman's spirit away from C. Well, one day, B brought her husband and her little daughter over to C's house. B and C were siblings after all. They talked over dinner while C's wife took the little girl away and performed some task of witchcraft that diverted the second wife's spirit to the little girl. The second wife's spirit had successfully attached itself to the little girl. My mom was that little girl. The medium connected these dots instantly, and he informed my dad that these voices have been following my mom since her childhood, so she must have heard them before. They used to be far away from her, but now they're getting closer. He said the closer they got, the more threat they possessed on my mom's life. They lived on the room ceiling at this point. After hearing this, the medium estimated my mom was going to die in the next 48 days. Note that this was also the period when my mom's health was immensely bad. She caught the virus, couldn't breathe, got sent to the ER multiple times, got a surgery, and had many severe anxiety attacks all in 4 months. The medium recommended a spiritual remedy, which I won't go into, but it worked. My mom never heard those voices again after that night. And here's the scariest part. We came to find out that the ghost of the second wife who was attached to my mom, well, her spirit in her full form was still lit on fire. I got chills when I got to know that detail. May she rest in peace. I live in Brownsville, Texas. It's a small town located near the Mexican border. I have had several odd stories and encounters that have happened throughout my life, and I wanted to share them with you. When my grandmother was sick and dying in the hospital, all my aunts and my mom said she looked evil, like something else had taken over her. My mom was told she would be the one to say when to start giving her end-of-life care so she could be peaceful and not in any pain. My grandmother was groaning in pain, and my mom decided that now would be the time to start her on morphine to help her ease her pain so she could eventually transition peacefully. When the doctors came, my grandma, who had been groaning in pain, suddenly looked at my aunts and said out loud, but to herself, "Who did it? Who?" in a very scary demonic voice. And then her eyes stopped on my mom and she goes, "Ah, of course it was you," and laughed, a laugh my mom said sounded unnatural. My grandma passed a day later. After my grandmother passed away, my mom waited up late to give our family from the UK a call to let them know of her passing. She said she felt an odd sensation and was suddenly fearful to look at the window. Suddenly, a knock on the window made her jump. She first brushed it off as one of the plants tapping against the window. That's when she heard another knock on the back glass sliding door. She felt a sudden terror come over her, and at that moment, the wind outside started to pick up and began howling. She said she heard banging on every single window at that point, as if someone was frantically trying to get in. My mom says she knelt down and started to pray. She said she didn't know any of the verses that left her mouth, but she kept praying until it suddenly stopped. She went to our bedrooms and saw we were sleeping soundly, as if nothing happened. When the noise, she knew, would have woken anyone up. The next day, my mom went to the neighbor and asked about the crazy wind from the night before. The neighbor said she had been awake all night, but had not heard any wind gusts and was curious as to why my mom asked. My mom told her what had happened, and the neighbor goes, "Oh, you probably did a type of exorcism or banishing on whatever was trying to get in." Well, fast forward years later, 2016, my mom passed away from the same disease my grandma, her mom, passed of. And the following year, in 2017, my dad also passed of the same disease. The night of my dad's passing, while asleep, I felt this pain in my head. It was the worst migraine ever. I rolled over and turned on my phone, and as soon as my phone turned on, my sister's call came through. She told me my dad had gone without oxygen for 15 minutes and that doctors were saying he was brain dead. When I got the news, I came to the living room where I found my mother-in-law asleep. I woke her to tell her what had happened. Suddenly, without warning, we felt this immense surge of fear and stared at the window. 3 low knocks sounded. We stayed quiet, and those 3 knocks suddenly sounded like someone slapping their hand on the glass, trying to get in. My mother-in-law said, "Whatever that is, it's nothing good. Do not look out the window." Then it stopped. Since then, there's been some odd things that have happened. As I'm writing you this, my washer decided to gush out water for no reason. No one is awake, nor is anyone using the washer. Well, I just wanted to share that one story. There's a few others, but we will leave the man in the hallway and Spider-Man shadow, as my daughter says, for another night. Good night. So that was it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have a spooky story that you'd like to share with us, please send your story to my email at daicyspooks@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone that has sent in their stories. Thank you guys so much. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye.